Good morning, everyone. I'm Aaron.
I'm Frank.
Thanks for being with us today. Today, we're going to talk about Medicaid Asset Protection Trusts predominantly. We will also touch on the resource and income numbers, what's exempt and not exempt, really, in that regard. We're going to do an example of when a trust would be best and documents and deadlines that apply. And Frank, in the legal world, we have plenty of deadlines usually.
Yeah, it's always fun.
So we did want to acknowledge that numbers have changed.
Yeah, so with these are going to be slightly different than some of our earlier presentations. So we do apologize for this. The state has not been making this easy on us just because as soon as we think we have the numbers straight, they change them on us. So in January, the federal poverty numbers came out, which then adjusted the Medicaid numbers. So these are now the new, most up-to-date numbers. They're similar to what we've been talking about the past few months. So again, if you're a single person applying for Medicaid in your home, your income is now up to $1,697 per month. So if you look at what that was as compared to last year, it's up $743. If we have a husband and wife or multiple people within the same household applying for Medicaid, both at home, that's gone up to $2,288 per month. So again, it's up over $900 from where it was last year for the same people. The asset limit, again, as we've been saying, has gone up pretty substantially. So last year it was $16,800 for a single person. That's now ballooned up to $30,182. So in our previous first month, January webinar for Medicaid Monday, it was in the $28,000 range. So it's gone up even a little bit more. And then again, couples, that's also increased all the way up to $40,820. So again, just looking at just where that was in comparison to where it was last year, it's gone up over $16,000, which again is a substantial increase. When I started doing this back in 2015, the number started right around 15,000, give or take. So the fact that it's more than doubled in just since that time, and it's gone up 16,000 just since last year, it is pretty substantial.
Yeah, I was going to say that the increase is more than the number was when I started, which I think was 12.5. I think it's been a long time, but it's clearly trending upward now. Who knows? Can always trend downward at some point too. We really don't know, but much higher for this year and right now, at least for the foreseeable future. What's exempt? Well, they used to do us a favor and round that number, right?
Right, did have a round number, yeah.
30,200 or 250. It was always either 250, 500, but no, not anymore. 30,182. So don't have 30,183, please. Prepaid burial, always important. Mistake we see people make is they spend all the money and then have it prepaid for the burial. Well, the honest fact is that everybody's going to meet their end at some point or another. Sorry for this sunny, lovely discussion, but you want to make sure that you have the funds to pay for it because it's not, generally speaking, probably more expensive than most people would realize.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess that's another positive of having such a high resource allowance now is like if you had $30,000 and you had a prepaid burial, there's probably enough in that $30,000 remaining to do some pretty nice arrangements and things at that time if you haven't prepaid. But again, if the idea is just to get money away from an applicant just to make them seem eligible, if that expense is coming for everybody, there's really no reason most of the time to not make sure that those arrangements are taken care of.
Yeah, pay for it first out of the money that's not exempt. Yes. Income producing business assets. We see this occasionally, most likely in the form of rental or rental properties. Life insurance, we do not see very much anymore with a face value under $1,500 because that has not been indexed for inflation. Big one in our business, IRAs and periodic payment status. And I'll acknowledge that on the radio show, we had a pretty opinionated caller about the Roth IRA.
I heard.
But we, every time that we have treated a Roth IRA like any other IRA, put it in periodic payment status, it has been exempted. So, just another reason to hire an attorney and to hire an attorney that knows what they're doing. I agree. One car, no asset limit. All right. Lamborghini or, a Yugo, doesn't really matter. Anywhere in between.
Just one.
Just one. And everything else is not exempt. Right.
So the house is one of the major assets that people come to us to talk to us about. They want to protect their house. It's not uncommon where it might be the only real asset that people have. people work a lot, like a long time to pay off that mortgage. Lou has talked in the past about how I believe his parents had a mortgage burning party where they actually took the mortgage and burned it, and everyone kind of celebrated. So we know how important the house is to people and to their family. So the nice thing is that, at least at the start, if you're in your house and you want to get Medicaid, your house is exempt as long as you, your spouse, or a minor or disabled child live in the house. So for many people, that comes as a pretty large surprise, because I think if anything, people generally think that if you go on Medicaid and you have to claim that you're poor and that you don't have assets, that the home is then at risk and you're going to lose the house. And for some people, that means you're going to lose everything. Now, that's not exactly true, right? Sometimes there are exemptions like this. Like if you're in your house wanting to get home care, they can save the house. If your spouse is in the house, so you can be in the nursing home getting Medicaid. Your spouse can live in the house, they can't take the house. If you have that minor disabled child living in the house, whether you're home or not, that exempts the house. But then there are some other exemptions and other kind of tricks up our sleeve that we use. I wouldn't say regularly, but certainly if it calls for it. So Aaron, a big one that we see a lot of that we use if we can is something called the caretaker child exception.
Yes, we get a lot of questions about this because a lot of people have Googled it mostly, but it is not necessarily the be all end all. You have to document it very carefully. And one of the problems with this, if it's a nursing home application, if they don't give it to you, then you have a resource that renders you ineligible because you're not in it.
Right.
So being in the house is a temporary exemption because a lot of times people unfortunately leave the house to go to a higher level of care.
Right. So for that caretaker child exception, the caretaker child has to have lived in the house for more than 2 years. They also have to have provided a nursing home level of care, essentially. So that's where Aaron said it has to be documented carefully. That's where we want to work with the treating physician or other medical professionals to make sure that we can documentarily prove that not only has the child lived in the house, but they've been providing such a level of care that if not for that child, that person would have wound up in a nursing home.
Correct. And it's just not the slam dunk that people think it is, because it can be denied. It's always better to get out and proactively plan, as we're going to talk about. And one of the reasons you want to proactively plan is you don't want your house going to an estate where the state can recover against it. Yeah. Meaning that what happens is if you go on Medicaid, state pays out so much every month for your care, and it accumulates a lien. If your house goes to your estate, that lien is then collected from any proceeds of that house.
Right. So I think, unfortunately, a lot of people see the good news that it's exempt because, well, you're in it, or your spouse is in it, or your kid's in it. It's minor, it's disabled. Well, that's great. That gets you eligibility currently, but it doesn't clean up that after death issue with that lien and that estate recovery, because it certainly doesn't bar them from estate recovery, except if you have a surviving spouse, that would bar recovery. If you have a minor child or a disabled child, that would bar recovery. But we have unfortunately heard stories where you have a spouse or minor child or a disabled child in the residence, and then something happens to that spouse or that disabled child. Now it's fully back on the table. Now it's subject to estate recovery if you pass, and also subject to that lien.
Yeah, so not a good, maybe short-term solution if we need it, but not what we rely on. As someone said to us in the past, protect your house, call up your O'Connor and Strauss. So I think this is pretty standard. Most people know that there's a 5-year look back for nursing home care. Home care right now, 0 look back. You see that we expect there to be a look back in 2024. There is a dichotomy with this, though, logically. As you can see, the asset and income limits have gone up. But here we're making this more restrictive. How those two things will come together in the future, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, if you go back to some of the previous webinars that we have in the Medicaid Monday series, we actually go through an example of how to calculate the penalty. But essentially, it's you take the amount of funds that has been transferred away during the look back, you total it up, you then divide that by the regional rate of where you are. So for the Albany Capital District, it's 12,744, I believe. It's very close to that. So you take the total number of transferred away, divide it by the penalty divisor, and that resulting calculation figure is the amount of time where Medicaid will not pay and you have a penalty period.
Yeah, so essentially for every $12,000 to $13,000 of gifts, you're getting a month of penalties.
Yes, yeah, so for rough math, just think for every, call it $13,000 you give away, it's 1 month of ineligibility for Medicaid.
So what do you do when you get in front of the problem, right? And we're really advocates of this because we have all the tools in the toolbox when we're proactively planning. When we're reactively planning, meaning that someone is on the door of a nursing home or needs care, we have to do things that we couldn't do if we had just done it earlier. So a Medicaid Asset Protection Trust is used in home care crisis planning. Yes. But generally speaking, we're doing this to get assets off the table for nursing home. A Medicaid Asset Protection Trust is a type of irrevocable trust. All right. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. Not as scary as it sounds, but yes, that is what the subset that we were in. Yeah, so just because you're hearing an irrevocable trust, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a Medicaid asset protection trust. There are other types of them. You know, life insurance trusts, exactly, gifting trusts. Yeah. You know. So there are types of irrevocable trust that would not offer the Medicaid protection, but just in general, when you're hearing us speak on these programs about an irrevocable trust, this is the type of trust that we're talking about. It's where you have certain abilities, certain protections, but then also some restrictions as well. So here you're going to appoint a trustee, someone other than you or your spouse. All right. You're going to have beneficiaries. They can be your children. They can be charities. They can be anybody really other than you or your spouse. If you put income producing assets in here, you have the right to income, or if there are rental properties inside an LLC, you have the right to net income. And at the end of the day, whatever's in here goes to your heirs outside of probate. What do we put into a Medicaid Asset Protection Trust? Almost everything other than tax deferred retirement accounts. Now, depending on where we are, if you're 85, I'm going to tell you need to put as much in here as possible. Probably, waited a little too long, although we've had people make it okay from that point. Generally, we want to start doing this in your 60s. Put your house into the trust, which does not affect your right to live there. You're still responsible for the maintenance and upkeep. Your beneficiaries still get a capital step up in basis. And if it's sold, you still get a capital gains exemption. So that's really an easy one. These other things, life insurance is a big one to put into a trust, because if your spouse is on Medicaid, they die and their insurance pays to you, you may either be needing care right then or needing care very soon. So we have to consider that. And depending on, again, where we are, we may put some cash in here, we may not. It's at the end of the day, it's whoever we're sitting across the table from, it's their money. So whatever they're comfortable risking or whatever they need outside to feel good, we're going to do that. So we're going to keep out certain things, right? So we're going to keep out some cash. So that's going to be at least in a bank account or two. And as Aaron already mentioned, any of your tax deferred retirement accounts. So that would be your 401, your IRA, your Roth. Anything that's tax deferred, we don't have to exempt we don't have to protect. It's already an exempt asset, as we've been talking about. Critical to keep in mind is that when someone goes on Medicaid and you keep that bank account outside, you want to make sure that you have a beneficiary on it. You do not want it go to probate, because we're going to have a recovery problem, and essentially more than likely you're going to lose the value of that bank account. As we said, although this is an irrevocable trust, believe it or not, you can change your trustee at any time. So if there's a problem, not a problem, we'll change it. You're fired. You can change your beneficiary at any time. That's much more likely to keep people on the straight and narrow, in my experience. Being the trustee is kind of a job, although a lot of times it doesn't really require a lot of work until the very near the end or very near the end. And believe it or not, we can amend or revoke this trust because we draft it carefully and reserve that power. So in our big advantages, big one right off the bat is probate avoidance. It keeps everybody out of court from having to deal with anything that's in the trust when either the maker or makers of the trust actually pass away. So we have many people that come in and they want to start proactively planning, as long as they're coming in early enough, like Aaron suggested, in your 60s. So if you never need Medicaid, which hopefully you don't, or your loved one doesn't, if they never needed Medicaid, then while the trust would have maybe set them up to need it, maybe they didn't need it. But at the end of the day, it still keeps everybody out of court and keeps things nice and easy for the beneficiaries to then deal with things on
on kind of their level at their speed rather than having to go through the probate process with the courts.
Right. So the big difference is if the real property is in a trust, when you pass away, people have the ability to do whatever they need to do essentially immediately, right? They can list a house, they can sell a house, they can do any of those things. If you're relying on going to probate, well, one, again, if you're on Medicaid, we might have a recovery issue. Two, we're talking delays and more money. It may be months before any of that happens. So,
I mean, we are hearing delays as long as several years down in New York City.
correct.
I don't think we've heard anything near that close in the Capital District, but it's just one of those things where even if you didn't get any other benefits from doing the trust, it's just kind of giving your people the ability to kind of take care of things when they want, how they want,
Exactly.
at their own speed. That has a huge advantage. Other big advantages, as we've been talking about, is getting you qualified for Medicaid. So for community Medicaid with your home care that we've gone quite a bit about in the first two programs, you get essentially eligible for that immediately because there's no look back period. Now that may change next year. We're anticipating that as of right now, given the information that we have, that is likely to change. But it's also should have been in place since 2020 and it hasn't, and we're sitting here in 2023 and it still isn't here yet. So who are we to say whether that's actually going to come to fruition or not? The nursing home, however, the look back, that is much more cut and dry. That has been 5 years, that since 2005.
5 or 6.
Yeah, 5 or 6. That hasn't changed during COVID. That hasn't changed during the public health emergency. There's been no thoughts about changing that to go away or to extend it from everything that I've been hearing. So the idea here is get your trust set up, get your stuff funded into that trust. And then in 5 years, if you or anyone else that set up the trust needs a nursing home, then the assets in there are then exempt from that look back and get passed on to your heirs rather than trying to go to Medicaid.
All right, so let's put it into practice instead of just talking in general terms. Okay? So we have Rachel Brooks, 84. She's a widow. All right, so that limits some planning opportunities.
Right, we don't have a wealth spouse to shield things with. We also don't have some of the other like tricks that we use for
That's
some things.
Yes. So she's hospitalized. This is a very common story in our office.
Yes.
Someone goes to rehab. Rehab may go well, may not go so well. They may be there for a week. They may be there for a month, 2 months. I think we've seen people there for 6 months. So
yeah, so we do another common thing that we just hear in general is when we have somebody that comes in for their family member and they're in rehab. Well, I think a lot of people then quote, well, we have 100 days of rehab. Right. That's not necessarily true.
correct.
You can get up to 100 days of rehab, presuming that it's medically necessary and approved by your treating providers. But it's very rare, I would say, that someone actually exhausts their 100 days of rehab.
Yes, I've seen it probably 2 or 3 times in 12 years.
Yeah.
So it typically is 15 days, 10 days, 20 days. And so this is a very common scenario, and we try to make the best of it as we can. All right, some more about Rachel. Mild memory loss, disorientation. Now we see a lot of people that have had a UTI and are disoriented for a period of time and come back. And unfortunately, we see some people who are just disoriented and it doesn't change. So that's also can be a crux of an issue we see a lot. Hopefully, right, we've done this person has a power of attorney in a healthcare proxy. I don't want to get into the weeds on that, but that is very important. All right, she's still verbal and her daughter lives nearby. She can help. And we're looking for about 10 hours a day, which is on the higher side, right? I mean, you can get up to 24/7 and we have people with 24/7, but we're probably going to have to do some fighting about the 10 hours.
Not entirely impossible.
Oh, no, not at all. But we need to be cognizant of that there might be a fight over the care amount.
So just to give you a sense of where she is financially, so she gets Social Security and she gets a small pension. So that brings her up to $23.45 a month. She's got some assets. She's got her home, an IRA, some checking, some savings, some brokerage accounts. So if her total income is $23.45, right, she's over her allowance of $16.97. So we want to make sure that we shelter her income. So essentially, she's got $648 too much of her income.
That's right.
So we would then create a pooled trust, which, spoiler alert, next month for Medicaid Monday, we will be talking about pooled trusts. So we will talk a lot more about what this is, how we use it, why we use it, all those good things. But for now, just take me at my word. We would set up a pooled trust for her monthly income of $648 above her allowance. That would go to her pooled trust every month, where then she can use it for herself or her expenses. And then we would create that Medicaid Asset Protection Trust that Aaron and I just went through for the home and the brokerage account. The checking and savings is actually below the asset limit, since it's up to 30,000 and change now. So she can keep all of her bank accounts outside the trust, where then she has free access to them and can essentially keep using them as she's been using them. The other assets are then off the table because they go into the trust.
Just a very minor point here where we see a lot of confusion. When her income comes in, the month it comes in, it's income.
Correct.
Any money remaining from the month, the following month becomes an asset. So people trip up on that a lot, and we need to make sure that we don't accumulate more of the income. We need to spend it.
So if we accomplished all of that, her assets are going to be that $25,000 just with those cash accounts. Her income gets down to $1,697 because we diverted the excess income over to the pool trust. And depending on how fast we were able to accomplish that by, she could be eligible for home care as early as April 1st. So here's where we want to get into some timing, talking about timing and eligibility. So Medicaid looks at what you have on the first of the month. We call it the snapshot date or the asset freeze date, or whatever you want to call it. That's what they're looking at. So the idea is that we always want to get people down below the asset limit prior to the first of a month. So for instance, Aaron, we've had this commonly happen, unfortunately. We're doing trust planning for somebody. Let's say they have a sizable brokerage account or a sizable life insurance.
Yes.
If we sign the trust on like the 25th, 26th, 27th of the month,
Almost no chance they're going to be able to move those.
exactly, because not only does the trust have to be created, but then it has to be funded. And now the paperwork can certainly get submitted to change ownership to the trust or the kids or whatever else that we're trying to do. Some assets just take a little while to move. So if it's cash is freely movable. We usually don't have issues with moving cash quickly. But when we're talking about moving other assets, like a brokerage account, like a life insurance policy, then we might have to roll into the next month because we may not have gotten the assets cleared by the first. It all kind of depends on what we're doing and how we're looking to do it. Once we get someone eligible, then we have to send all their paperwork into the local county office. All right. And then they have a period of time where then they can process that Medicaid application. So in the vast majority of cases, previously to this year, we were doing pooled trusts with just about, I would say, probably 90% of our home care applications. Just because the the income limit was at $954 was very low. And it was just not common for somebody to have income below that amount. Now with it up to about $1,700 a month, we are seeing quite more people than before not need pooled trusts because their incomes just are maybe a little below or just a little bit over, that it doesn't make sense to do anything further. So with all that said, if we need a pooled trust to do anything, then the Medicaid office has 90 days to approve a Medicaid application. If we don't need a pooled trust, then they have 45.
Right. So the typical documents needed are, and this, we provide a checklist to our clients for these purposes, but you have to identify who you are. If it's a nursing home app, we have to go back for 5 years of all statements. Sometimes it's an issue with who can actually sign the Medicaid application. So these are all things that need to be considered, but generally not, just because you're missing one identifying document, generally not going to be a problem. We've had birth certificates missing, whatever you can think of, but the records, the financial records have to be there. And remember, the onus is on the applicant, meaning that if the applicant doesn't provide something, that issue is going to be resolved against them.
In spousal refusal. So if sometimes we can't use a trust, right? If we have a Medicaid situation where we have a nursing home and we can't use a Medicaid Asset Protection Trust because funding it would create a problem with the 5-year look-back period. If we do have a community spouse, we can use something called spousal refusal. We've talked about it in the past on many of our Medicaid programs. It's still available. It essentially is this spouse signing a statement saying, I need my income and my assets for me. And by doing that, it essentially takes the spouse's income and assets off the table for Medicaid to determine whether the sick spouse qualifies for Medicaid. We're just looking at just their income, just their assets. This has been frequently targeted in the budgets every year for the last 20-something years of trying to get rid of spousal refusal. It's still here, and it's still something that we just keep in our toolbox as another way of making sure that people get the care that they need.
Again, a good temporary solution, but generally speaking, most couples are of similar ages, right? So once we do this, we try to do further planning to protect assets. Again, bigger message, get out and do it early. So as I just said, plan ahead, get your Medicaid asset protection done. If you are caring for someone, investigate what's out there. We're happy to take a consultation, give us a call. And I just think that a lot of people feel like there's nothing they can do, but there almost always is a solution. Some are better than others. The ones that are done on the front end, before there's a problem, are better than the ones later.